We're the writing tips you need to learn how to write character deaths the right way and kill off characters without killing your story. Join me on the journey toward world building my own story, as well as providing you with all the writing tips you need to make your story and characters stand out from all the rest. What is up, you muffin munching muggles? Welcome to Fiction and Reality, where we help you, yes, you become the most devilishly gifted human that you know you are and that you knew you always could be. Now, there are moments in our lives when we begin to wonder just why exactly we're flying on this godforsaken dust rock, and why the meteors haven't crashed down and buried us in the tombstones that we deserve. So let's just start by exploring the purpose of death in your novel. You should begin by asking whether or not your character or story will flourish as a result of one of your characters dying. I don't want to be restricted and delusional by pretending, especially in the space of writing high-octane fiction fantasy battles, that you won't lose a mob or two in between sword clashing and limitless duels. But if you can't concretely write out why this death will attenuate the plot or progress the character arc, or close the arc of the characters affected by the passing, then you should consider removing the thought from your mind. Run the risk assessment of doing more harm than good to your story. The purpose of death in a story is to bring attention to mortality, but not glaze over what actually gives meaning to that death. The trials and tribulations, the journey, if you will, of the character that's getting burned at the stake. Having a concrete understanding of why you are sending your characters to the gulag.
Welcome to the gulag. If you survive, you earn your freedom.
And having supported that premise through the actions they've taken or the decisions they made allows your audience to measure the weight of the emotional bonds linking them to the character, compounding the troughs, the lowlights and high points, and ultimately coming to a conclusion of their own accord. And that threads us towards our next position. If you want your character to dance in step with death and have your reader sopping in tears or their tongues parched with the bittersweet taste of sawdust, you'll need to know the journey of death. Now, in the former parts of your character's journey, they must lose something in order to gain sympathy from your reader. And the best way I know how to explain this is through the eyes of the black and red scarves in my novel. You see, these characters hailing from Barren Valley were reared having what most would consider a normal nuclear life. Mothers, fathers, sisters. And there's an emotional component on that journey of death that you as a writer simply cannot miss. When dealing with your characters or what have you, there should be a gradual shift or build up to any momentous event, and death is no exception. You see, death should be slowly drifting like a soft glaciering breeze whispering in the wind, wafting over the cheeks of your reader and nicking their hearts with ungodly fears of what it could become. This mounding tension means everything when trying to execute this properly for your story. There was an inflection point in my story where two warring Arcanist nations crashing down upon Barren Valley, singeing the people of Barren Valley with the arcs of their fireballs, crunching their bones with the swift stroke of their swords, and all for the possibility of a legend or a fable. Before you pull the trigger, give your readers some emotional link to hold on to. Take something from your character to trigger the agonizing journey toward the depths of hell and an emotional response for the audience to cling on to. And that's all following your character's journey of death is, if you truly think about it. This long woven wire needed with infinite knots, each kink representing an emotional event, forging an emotional connection between your reader and the character, and fringed at its terminal ends. I've given my audience something to identify with, right? The loss of innocence and, in some instances, their first encounter with mortality through the loss of their loved one and the withering of their crimson rose petal life or whatever vision they had left of it. A loss of freedom, a loss of direction. At the crux of my story kindles these flames from the will of the dead and the understanding that a man does not die when he leaves the earth, but when the values, beliefs, and ideals that he's instilled into the ones left behind wither away. Another tip on embarking on the journey of death is don't be afraid to chase a non-linear death. When many people embark on the character's journey towards death, it tends to run linear, but it doesn't always have to be that way. Just to get you guys thinking outside the box, understand the journey of death does not have to be restricted. Just for a simple example, some of the black scarves in my novel toe straight down the line, and after undergoing some transformative event and having enough emotional knots laced into that fringed wire of death, they ultimately march to their own ultimate demise. But you can also guide the beast with two concurrent but reciprocal timelines, right? Readers know up front that the red and black scars were warring over the current state of Barren Valley and that the character who lit fires of rebellion under the red scarves died decades ago before the events of the present. But what if you could lure your audience or readers along on a hook, knowing that your character, or in the case of my story, the man or the king who refused to take the throne and lived ensuring that all his people knew that a true king walks among his people, was the one responsible fueling the resistance that now stands against the tyrannical Arcanists who landed years after the war had ended in search of fables once more, and who now heads the Black Scars Without even knowing explicitly how the king died, without even knowing explicitly how he lived, having only the tales and stories of the living to measure him by. But as you progress deeper into the story, uncovering new tokens about his backstory, the choices he made, the people he protected, the morals and ethics he held sacred, and the rules he had broken, gradually crafting your own paradigm while growing alongside the ever-evolving plot in the present. There are infinite benefits to driving the scythe home through this method. It's meticulous and requires a lot of plotting and planning, but this is one of the most methodical ways to forge a bond between your audience and your character and attenuate the effect of losing them that much more. See, it's one thing to linearly grow alongside your character, but having to live through the grief of the living while reflecting on the coarse memories stirring with honey sweet milk and bitter ale adds an extra layer to the fray. Do you want the deaths in your stories to work? Well, realize that efficiency is clever laziness. Get up, you old bag of bones.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
Path to achieve failure.
Go outside and get a bag.
Besides that being one of my favorite Rainbow Six Siege quotes, there are definitely some snakes in those boots worth stamping out. Rushing emotionally driven plot mechanisms never ends well, and with death, the outcome is 10x'd. If you don't take the time to meticulously plot out your transformative events, that thread, and the dynamic shifts in your character's aperture, your reader will not take the time to care about what happens to them. That is why certain characters, I'm not saying any names, for 10 years at least. And that's why certain characters who've been rushed to the slaughterhouse, even if they had a stellar character arc, can fall flat on their face and strip the reader of any emotional links they forged with them. Think of the mechanism of death as a waiting tide and not a bursting bullet. No one would care about what happened to the king in my novel without having seen the world through his eyes, and the eyes of those who long for his presence. Efficiency is clever laziness, and the tenure to create a death that's worthwhile for both your story and your reader is a long, strenuous, but meaningful one. Another thing you want to do when weaving those knots is figure out the depth of your character's journey, tracking them from an inflection point and onwards towards the end of the road. Now, it reflects in my writing in my mind that the characters you create should all be given a chance to fare on both sides of the field, whether through their actions, their words, or their backstory. For the king of Barren Valley, that meant combing out his own traumas as a child, having witnessed the raiding of the Valkyries upon his own homeland, veering him towards deciding to join one of the great lands of Arkany alongside his friend. The course essentially runs from adolescence after trickling through a multitude of transformative events throughout that timeline, toward the mid-upper limit of his 20s when those transformative events came to a head. It's up to you to decide how surface level you want to be with your character's prior traumas or backstory, but understand that the more niche and intricate you are with fleshing those transformative events out, the more realistic your character will feel and the more attached your audience will be when it ultimately comes time to pull the trigger. And if you're interested in delving further below the surface, you'll have to be able to look through the eyes of the Reaper. And right now, that Reaper's cold, desolate, hollow eyes are staring right at that like button. If you're enjoying the video right now, go ahead and leave a like to show some love. I would say there are 3 primary strata that feel the immediate and transient impact of a character's death, which includes but aren't limited to the character themselves, the retainers, and society at large. For the character, the knots should all be sewn up with regard to their arcs by the time that they've already been deleted and are lying 6 feet under the ground with grub worms and maggots.
All right, maggots, listen up. Popo's about to teach you the pecking order.
However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the focal impact of their death is snuffed out and that it doesn't have the potential to spread through the masses. The king in my story was able to complete his character arc, however, there were unfortunately regrets he died with, and a sense of hopelessness flickering as the lights faded dimmer and dimmer, and a song of betrayal drummed in his ears. While every character dies, they may not necessarily acquire the death that they were looking for or the outcome. However, knowing their desires from tracking along on their journey, knowing the irreplaceable connections they forced, and seeing that all ripped from their hands opens the opportunity to incite change among characters that are idling in the periphery. Never miss this opportunity. It's where you will have the chance to tie the final red ribbon on your character's casket and do away with any loose ends on the plot. With regard to the term retainers, what do I mean? Those who adore you and those who despise you, or at least oppose the legacy of the character that was lost. While the character in most instances is the highlight of the journey of death, the impact of those who chalice or raise swords to them cannot be overstated enough. A character's death should always mean something to someone, even if there are no positive virtues in association with the event. even if some critics feel more inclined to spit on their grave rather than to leave a bouquet of flowers on their tombstone. With regard to the king, those fighting to uphold his will would be the red scarves, and those in opposition the black scarves. And such is the journey of life, paralleling the journey of death. Even the red and black scarves clash with each other, with one side being led towards fielding morals of the red and the other taking up the black. What grievances are derived from the character's death, and how do they survive through this? The retainers are those who carry forward the legacy of the lost character, either by honoring their ideals if they adore them, or by opposing their memory if they despise them, reflecting the enduring impact of the loss. Ask yourself exactly how each side finds meaning in the death of said character. Other than the retainers, there's a social system and foundation upon which the world spins along its axis. The world just ain't big enough for the two of us.
Who you calling pinhead?
There's a totem pole where status supersedes all, and sometimes the slabs in that tower can slip from their hierarchical positions. The death of the king shaped the future conflicts that come within Barren Valley, and at the same time, an entire city that had once had every inkling of freedom imaginable granted to them and had not known the struggle to preserve life in a world of wolves. Understand all the pieces of the puzzle. The world you create is living and moving, so take advantage of it, and ask yourself if losing one character may spark up another fruitless war, or perhaps it ignites an undying loyalty, a scorching wrath. What are the societal implications? The gears shift on their axis, and the direction in which they spin is forward. You need to know how the death of your character will actually help push the plot onward, and if it will achieve the desired effect or leave you floating and stranded in stasis, regardless of those who despise, who adore, or the focal impact on the characters themselves. In the end, the death of a character should never be a hollow event. It must ripple through the world, altering relationships, shifting power dynamics, and pushing the story forward. Whether it ignites a war, strengthens alliances, or sows chaos, the consequences must feel inevitable, rooted in the very fabric of your world. Every action, every loss, every sacrifice you have leads to a greater narrative, propelling the characters and the plot toward new conflicts, challenges, or revelations. Only then will you truly harness the power of death in your story, not as an end, but as a transformative force that shapes the future. So how do you figure out if killing your character is worth it, if it's a mistake, or if it will erode the essence of your story? You'll need to figure out who deserves death. Hear ye, hear ye. The verdict is 20 million years in the clank.
It's just the way we talk in the clink. Been a lot of fun talk about prison today.
The death of any character, regardless of their alignment, should resonate with the core themes of the story, highlighting ideas like justice, revenge, or the futility of conflict, playing the fields of moral ambiguity. However, the moral questions surrounding who deserves death are never entirely clear-cut. A well-crafted narrative will make readers question whether a character's death is truly deserved, or if it serves a larger, more nuanced purpose in the world and the lives of the remaining characters. Ultimately, the decision of who deserves death must be purposeful, ensuring that the loss drives the plot, develops other characters, and deepens the overall message of the story. So when trying to decide if your character deserves death, or rather if killing a character is the right thing for your story, consider asking some of these questions. Does it align with the story's themes? Will it progress the tide of your story? How will it affect the protagonist and other characters? Is it predictable, or will it surprise the reader? Does it feel like it's earned, or is it sort of gratuitous? Can the effect be achieved without killing your character? If so, why kill them? If you don't have a concrete answer to any of these questions, then it's time to reevaluate if pulling the trigger really is the right thing to do. Deserving death insinuates having to earn it, and rightfully so. Personally, I learned this lesson when undertaking the first major death of my novel, which resulted in me scraping an entire chunk of my story's act away simply because I felt nothing when my character died, and because their death meant nothing to the plot. There are, however, caveats. After a couple of chapters of integrating a character into my story and establishing a bond between the reader and them, who self-admittedly is terminally ill and shouldn't be out and about, following a not-so-PG rated event involving shadows and blood, that character ultimately died, something that was guaranteed after suffering fatal injuries during an escape from one of the Black Scarves. The primary purpose of this character was to throw his little brother, who hadn't been introduced yet, on the edge of the world of madness, as well as to create a link between the little brother and one of the apathetic and heartless characters on the Zenobian side of the fence, who believes that the entire point of life is simply to survive, take advantage of others, and prey upon them and devour whenever and however you can. You don't want death to be cheapened to bear hollow and acrid fruit. Excessive exposure to death for little more than shock value, overusing the mechanisms of death to fill in faulty plot, but above all, not following through with the impact of death on your living world corrodes the very fabric of the literary mechanism and all rhyme of reason for using it. Death doesn't just end when the character stops breathing and through flower beds laid on their grave. No, it sifts through those who carry the memories of the dead, the actions of the society at large in response to the dire event, and ultimately those who will both carry out or oppose the will of the dead. You see, I knew that my characters could be enriched by aligning their development through the life of the king and his journey to the end. It's one of the main driving forces for my plot, the story of taking action in order to defend the compass of morality, even when those surrounding you have labeled you an inept fool in your final days, foolish to have taken up a fight that you know you wouldn't have won. Allow the readers to watch a superficially spiteful allegiance grow into something through the silent acknowledgement of shared experiences and trauma, and thus open the opportunity for continuous but gradual dynamic transformation. Characters that, through their sort of knotted wire of transformative events, mediate a dynamic shift into the characters afflicted by the tragedy, push the plot forward and breathe life into your story, even after they are far gone, or have 100% completed their arc within the story, even if they didn't attain all the glory they set out to capture. Create thresholds that allow you to feel safe and confident in turning the lights off. And now that we know if killing our character is the right thing to do, we're sort of allured to ferreting out the right way to execute the mission. So what is the right way to kill off a character? Technically, you can kill your character any way you want to. Except for this, there's the self-sacrificial lamb, of course, where the character goes up in a ball of smoke to defend the morals they hold sacred and defend those too frail or nimble to protect themselves, and those whose principles or ethics they adhere to, even in the face of adversity, knowing that there's no possible way to overcome the force that stands before them. Perhaps your character was deadlocked in a war of attrition between mind and matter and simply abandoned hope of defeating the beast roaming in their heads, bending the knee and being swallowed by the internal conflict they had been battling with, and ended up stepping on the ledge and taking one final leap of faith. Maybe they didn't achieve anything and were merely trying to survive the powers that be, but lacked the wherewithal, strength, and acquisition to make a stand. In essence, a mode of resistance that's fueled by nothing more than a selfish determination to survive, no matter the cost or consequences that await them. You want to pick the means of dying that's relative to the way your character carries himself. Does a thief die trying to steal? Does a knight die defending his house's honor? Does a tyrant die of his own stubbornness to cling to power? Does a merchant die defending his stock? Does a parent die defending their children? If you take it upon yourself to look deep enough, you'll find that every action, every relationship, every transformative event, and every death are connected. Generally speaking, the timeline of events takes precedent over whatever way you decide to kill your characters. The more time your reader and audience spends with your character, the more threads there should be weaving and locking between the two entities, forming a more rigid and structured bond. Though the way you dispose of your character is extremely important, as it'll set the scope of events to follow and immortalize their reputation, the impact of characters' deaths becomes prominent, curls the emotional coils when the relationship between the characters has been allowed to naturally nurture itself. Never rush death, at least not if you want your audience to steal your souls, because they won't have one to give while watching your characters slowly begin to croak. If you took something from this video, I want you to take a moment to crack that subscribe button below and like the video. Pushes these videos out so that others can take key tokens that you gain. Do your fellow comrades a favor. Also, thank you everyone for 200 subscribers. Just wanted to say thank you to the helpful, loyal audience, and I hope to see you all become more active in the comments as our group continues to grow larger and larger. I'm thinking about doing another giveaway, but I need some time to think about exactly what it will be. I will leave a link to my socials in the description below. If you want more info on how to improve your story, feel free to check out some of my other videos right here. And with that, remember, if ever you're lost in the forestry of words, strip your mind from fantasy and look to the window of the world, and there your mind will run free.